He saved Trump's life, then vanished without a trace. No records, no name, no past. For decades, the truth remained buried, until one night, Donald Trump walks into Secret Service headquarters, demanding answers. What he discovers is more shocking than anyone could have imagined: a hidden conspiracy, a rogue agent erased from history, and a power so dangerous that exposing it could change everything. Who was Specter? Why was he erased? And what deadly secrets still lurk in the shadows? Headquarters of the United States Secret Service, Washington, D.C. The air was bitterly cold, with snow piling up in patches along the sidewalks. Wind howled between the government buildings. Inside the Secret Service headquarters, agents were busy with a flood of reports, surveillance footage flickering constantly across multiple screens. No one expected today to be any different from any other until the front doors swung open. A man strode in, no prior announcement, no security detail. Donald Trump. The room seemed to freeze. Glances were exchanged quickly. A few agents instinctively stood up, hands unconsciously touching their holsters, but no one spoke. Secret Service Director Robert Connell, standing a few steps away, observed the scene. He had served under multiple presidents, witnessed countless political events, but never before had Trump walked in unannounced. One agent stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. "Sir, what do you need?" Trump didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept across the room before he spoke, slow and deliberate. "I need to find someone. A Secret Service agent who saved my life years ago, but there's no record of him." No one reacted immediately. A young agent glanced at a computer screen as if expecting some information to appear, but the screen remained blank. Connolly stepped forward, eyes locked on Trump. "You're saying there's no record?" "That's right." Trump's voice was firm, as if he never existed. Silence weighed heavily in the room. The agents exchanged looks. One of them unconsciously glanced toward the door, as if waiting for someone to step in and explain. Connolly crossed his arms, his voice measured. "Are you sure he was one of ours?" Trump looked him straight in the eye. "I know a Secret Service agent when I see one." Connolly didn't respond right away. He turned to Mark Hendricks, the agent responsible for data systems. "Search all records of active and retired agents from the last 40 years, including encrypted or sealed files." Hendricks nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. Lines of data flooded the screen. Minutes passed. All eyes were on the monitor. Hendricks stopped, frowning. "There's nothing." Trump stared at the empty results, his lips pressing into a thin line. "How does someone who saved my life disappear, as if he never existed?" Connolly took a deep breath. "If he existed, we'll find him." No one in the room spoke, but everyone knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary search. They were stepping into a mystery that some might prefer remained buried. Inside the Secret Service operations room, the air was heavy. The national database had been scanned 3 times, yet the results remained unchanged. There was no record matching Trump's description. Mark Hendricks rechecked the search algorithm, expanding the parameters to other intelligence agencies. The room remained suffocatingly silent, save for the rapid clicking of the keyboard. Donald Trump folded his arms across his chest, eyes locked on the screen. "Run facial recognition again. If there's no name, find someone who matches my description." Hendricks nodded, initiating a search through millions of images in federal databases. Connolly stood beside him, voice steady but firm. "Do you remember any other details? Height, voice, any distinguishing marks?" Trump was silent for a moment. "He had a long scar on his left hand. I saw it clearly when he pulled me to safety. Before he disappeared, he only said one thing: don't let them win." Mark Hendricks added the new details into the system. Within less than a minute, the system responded. A list of over 50 files appeared, but they were all agents who had either died or gone missing years ago. Hendricks skimmed through the list, then suddenly stopped. "There's a deleted file." Trump and Connolly immediately turned. Deleted? Connolly narrowed his eyes. Hendricks opened the file. On the screen, only a single line of information remained. Codename, Specter. Status, erased from the system. No image, no real name, no additional data. Trump stared at the screen, his voice dropping to a low tone. Specter. That name sounds familiar. Connolly spoke slowly. That name is not just an ordinary alias, sir. Trump turned to him. What do you mean? Connolly folded his arms, his gaze darkening. I've been with this agency for over 30 years. I've only heard that name once, and when I did, I was warned that if I wanted to stay alive, I should never mention it again. A long silence fell over the room. Trump didn't blink, his eyes locked on Connolly. I don't care what they warned you. I want to know who he is and why someone who saved me was erased from history. Connolly slowly nodded. We need someone who might know about this, but he left the agency a long time ago. Who? Michael Hudson, a former undercover agent, retired in 1997. If anyone knows about Specter, it's him. Trump nodded firmly. Then we go find him. 4 hours later, an armored SUV pulled up in front of a small house in suburban Virginia. The house was unremarkable, but Trump noticed the hidden security cameras at each corner. Connolly stepped forward and knocked hard 3 times. No response. He knocked again. A rough, wary voice came from inside. I don't care who you are. Leave. Trump stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Michael Hudson. I'm Donald Trump. I'm here about Specter. A long pause followed. Then, a click echoed. The door opened slightly, revealing a man in his 60s, his face stern, eyes sharp as a blade. He stared at Trump. If you came here asking about Specter, then you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Connolly stepped in, his voice steady. We just want the truth. Hudson sighed, stepped back, and motioned them inside. The house was modest, but the walls were lined with old photographs, medals, and yellowed newspapers. On the table, a handgun sat next to an unfinished cup of coffee. Trump took in everything, then his eyes landed on a black and white photograph. A group of agents stood in formation, but one man stood slightly apart, not looking at the camera, as if he was watching something beyond the frame. Trump pointed at him. Is this him? Hudson followed his gaze. A brief hesitation flickered across his face before he nodded. Yes, but his real name wasn't Specter. David Callahan, one of the best agents I ever knew. Trump gripped the photo. Is he still alive? Hudson didn't answer immediately. He stared at Trump for a long moment before saying something that sent a chill through the room. If he is alive, he probably doesn't want to be found. The room fell into silence. Trump placed the photograph on the table, his gaze never leaving Hudson. You said he doesn't want to be found. What do you mean? Hudson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. David Callahan wasn't just any agent. He was a ghost, operated in missions the government would never acknowledge. If his name has been erased from the system, there are only 2 possibilities. Either he's dead, or someone powerful wants the world to think he is. Connolly frowned. Then do you know of any place where we might find a trace of Callahan? Hudson remained silent for a long moment, then stood up and walked over to an old cabinet. He opened the bottom drawer and retrieved a faded envelope. Inside was an old sheet of paper and a small key. He slid the envelope toward Trump. 2 years ago, someone sent this to me. No name, no trace, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Trump opened it. There was only a single handwritten line. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. New Orleans, 351 St. Pierre. Connolly stared at the writing. This could be a trap. Hudson nodded. Or it could be the only chance to find the truth. Trump didn't hesitate. "We're going to New Orleans." 2 days later, Trump, Connolly, and 2 Secret Service agents arrived in New Orleans on a private jet. They landed at midnight, the streets damp from rain, neon lights reflecting off the cobblestone sidewalks. Connolly sat in the back of the SUV, scanning the file on 351 St. Pierre. This building used to be an old warehouse, owned by a private company. No recorded activity in the past 15 years. Trump observed the street as their vehicle entered the darker part of the Garca city. Then who's still using it? They pulled up in front of a 2-story building with boarded-up windows. No sign of life. Connolly signaled for an agent to check the entrance. The agent drew his gun, stepped up to the large metal door, and tried the handle. It was locked. Trump took out the key Hudson had given him and inserted it into the lock. It turned immediately. The team drew their weapons and stepped inside. Inside was an open space filled with wooden crates and dusty bookshelves. In the center, an old table held a stack of documents. Connolly moved forward and flipped open the files. Jesus Christ. Trump looked at the contents. Files on classified operations, lists of erased agents, connections between the government and the underworld. But the most shocking revelation on the last page was a photograph of Trump, taken in 1982, right before he was ambushed. Trump stared at it, a chill running down his spine. Footsteps echoed outside the door. Connolly reacted instantly, signaling for everyone to kill the lights. Trump and the 2 agents pressed against the crates. The door creaked open. A tall man in a long coat stepped inside, his silhouette illuminated by the dim streetlight filtering through the cracks. His face came into view. David Callahan. Trump stood up, eyes locked on the man before him. "You're alive." Callahan studied Trump, his expression unreadable. "I didn't think you'd find me." Trump took a step forward. "I owe you my life, but I need to know the truth." Callahan stared at him for a long moment, then glanced at the files on the table. "You shouldn't be digging into this." Connolly tightened his grip on his gun. "Why? Because it involves who?" Callahan smirked coldly. "Not who. What?" He pulled out a chair, sat down, and took out a cigarette but didn't light it. "What I uncovered before I disappeared wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a system. The government, financial corporations, criminal organizations, they're all connected. And they can't let anyone expose it." Trump met his gaze. "Then why did you save me that night?" Callahan was silent for a moment before replying slowly. "Because you were the one variable they didn't account for." The room fell silent. Trump took a deep breath. "If what you're saying is true, then I won't stop. They tried to kill me once. Now I want to know why." Callahan shook his head, his eyes turning sharp. "You think just because you're Donald Trump they won't try again?" The sound of shattering glass. A bullet pierced through the window, lodging into the bookshelf inches from Trump. "We're being watched." Callahan sprang to his feet, drawing a gun from his waist. "Get out, now, if we want to live." A second bullet sliced through the air, embedding itself into the wall just inches from Trump's head. Callahan moved like a predator. He lunged toward the window, yanking the curtain shut. "We have to move." Awesome. Connolly and the 2 agents flanked Trump, escorting him toward the back door. Another bullet shattered a lamp, plunging the room into darkness. "There are at least 3 snipers," Callahan muttered. "They don't plan on letting us walk out of here alive." There was no time to think. Connolly threw open the back door, signaling the team forward. Trump and the 2 agents drew their guns, covering the exits. As they stepped into the alley, the headlights of a black SUV suddenly flared on, blinding them. "Down!" Callahan shouted, shoving Trump aside. Gunfire erupted. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal. Connolly fired 2 shots toward the SUV. One hit the windshield, causing the driver inside to veer off course. Callahan grabbed Trump's arm, pulling him toward the alley corner. "We can't run forever. We need a vehicle." 3 blocks down, there's a parking lot, Connolly said. "Split up," Callahan ordered. "I'll draw them away. Meet me there." Without waiting for a response, he dashed in the opposite direction, firing at their pursuers in the shadows. Trump, Connolly, and the 2 agents sprinted through the darkened streets of New Orleans, sirens wailing in the distance. They reached the parking lot and found an old sedan still intact. Connolly hotwired the engine. "Where's Callahan?" Trump asked, scanning the area. No sign of him. "We can't wait," Connolly growled, hitting the gas. The car sped off, disappearing into the empty road. "Someone was tracking us from the moment we arrived," Trump said, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "This isn't just about Callahan. Someone was waiting to silence all of us." The engine roared as the SUV pursuing them tore down the desolate highway. Trump sat in the back, his gaze tense as he watched the approaching threat. Connolly swerved sharply, sending the car skidding across the wet asphalt, but the headlights behind them remained persistent. "We need to split directions." Before Trump could respond, Connolly jerked the wheel, veering the car into an abandoned parking structure, its flickering lights casting eerie shadows. He killed the engine. "Out! Now!" Trump and Connolly quickly exited, hugging the darkened walls. The pursuing vehicle revved in the distance, its driver seemingly unaware that they had stopped. "Where now?" Trump asked. Connolly scanned the lot, then his eyes landed on an old sedan parked nearby. He checked the door locked. But before he could act, a deep voice emerged from the darkness. "I think you could use some help." Both men spun around, weapons raised. A tall, imposing figure stepped out from behind the car. "David Callahan." "You did well getting this far," Callahan said, unfazed by the guns pointed at him. Trump lowered his weapon, his eyes sharp. "You've been following us?" Callahan smirked. "No, but if you found me, that means you've stepped into a war you can't turn back from." Connolly stole a glance down the road. Time was running out. "So what do you know?" Trump demanded. Callahan reached into his coat, pulling out an aged envelope. He slowly slid out a photograph and handed it to Trump. The man pulling the final strings disappeared from politics over 30 years ago. Trump took the photo. Under the dim glow of a streetlight, it showed an older man with silver hair, dressed in a pristine suit, standing among a group of politicians and businessmen from the late 1970s. "This is," Trump narrowed his eyes. "Richard Langston," Callahan said, "senior advisor to 3 presidents, one of the most powerful men in America that no one knows exists." Trump clenched the photograph. Langston, a name he'd heard whispered but never seen surface. "Is he alive?" Callahan nodded. "He is, but you won't find him through conventional means." Trump stared at the address Callahan handed him. "A private estate in Wyoming." "Then we're going to Wyoming." 3 days later, a black SUV drove through the snow-covered roads of Wyoming, heading toward a vast estate isolated in the mountains. Trump, Connolly, and Callahan sat in silence inside the vehicle. No one spoke, but they all understood that this was the moment of reckoning. As they reached the main gate, a security agent in a black suit stepped out, looking at them through the car window. "Mr. Langston has been expecting you." Trump wasn't surprised. He knew men like Langston were always one step ahead. They entered the grand mansion, where Richard Langston was seated in a luxurious lounge, sipping a glass of whiskey, as if he had no worries at all. The old man looked at Trump, offering a faint smile. "So, you finally arrived." Trump stood tall, eyes locked onto Langston. "I want the truth. Why did you try to have me killed in 1982? Langston set down his glass, staring at him. "Because you weren't part of our plan." A long silence followed. Langston continued. We control America not with guns but with money, politics and information. People like you, those who don't play by the rules, are a threat. Trump smirked. Then why am I still alive? Langston chuckled lightly. Because someone disrupted our plan. Trump understood immediately. David Callahan. Langston turned his gaze to Callahan, his eyes sharp. You should have never interfered in things that didn't concern you. Callahan crossed his arms, his voice cold. I swore allegiance to America, not to men like you. Langston chuckled, shaking his head. What a shame. But now what? Do you think you can change the past, Trump? Trump folded his arms, looking directly at Langston. I don't care about the past. I just want to make sure men like you never do it again. Langston narrowed his eyes, then laughed. You think you can overthrow this system? Have you seen how deep it runs? Trump didn't blink. I don't need to overthrow it. I just need to expose it. Langston laughed louder. You won't do it. Because you know if you do, America will collapse. Trump remained calm. I'll let the people decide. Langston sighed, taking one last sip of whiskey. Then do what you do best, Trump. Show the world the truth. 2 weeks later, a special press conference was held in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of journalists crowded the room, waiting for a major announcement. Trump stepped up to the podium, placing a thick folder on the table. Today, I will tell you a story about America, a story of power, corruption, and secrets that have been buried for 4 decades. Camera shutters clicked furiously. I am not afraid. I was once a target of these people, but I am still standing here, and I will not let them continue to control this country. The screen behind him displayed images of Project Clearsky, lists of targeted individuals, and Langston's file. Shockwaves rippled through the media. All of America was in an uproar. 3 months later, a congressional hearing was held. Langston was summoned, along with several other powerful figures. David Callahan was reinstated with full honors, his name inscribed on the Wall of Honor at the U.S. Secret Service. In Trump's final statement regarding the scandal, he spoke just one sentence. The truth cannot be hidden forever. Langston was sentenced to life in prison. Project Clearsky was officially erased from American history. 1 year later, at a small cafe in New York, Trump met Callahan again. What are you planning to do now? Trump asked. Callahan took a sip of coffee, gazing out at the bustling street. I've lived in the shadows for too long. Now I want to know what a no life feels like. Trump nodded, then smiled lightly. Men like you should never be forgotten. Callahan smirked, his sharp eyes as piercing as ever. And men like you should never be defeated. Trump stood up, shook Callahan's hand firmly, then stepped out into the streets, where the lights of New York City still burned bright as ever. The truth had been brought to light, but the fight for America had never truly ended. Thank you for following the story. The truth has finally come to light, but the world is never short of mysteries. The forces lurking in the shadows will always try to manipulate power and hide what they don't want anyone to know. The battle doesn't end, it only changes form. Callahan has finally stepped out of the darkness, and Trump has done what no one else dared to do, expose the truth. But is this really the end? Or just the beginning of another fight? If you were Callahan, what would you do? Would you continue to stay hidden or face a world that no longer belongs to you? And if you were Trump, knowing that even greater secrets might still be out there, would you stop or keep searching for the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with those who love untold mysteries. See you in the next one.